It was very essential to me to understand that music could be anything.
Hi, this is Alvinro. I am at Tremor Festival with producer and singer-songwriter Lua Caiano. Good morning.
Good morning.
To take it very general, your music combines some electronic production, experimental pop, and traditional folk. And I want to start talking about the last part, about the Portuguese traditional music and popular chants. I was wondering, how did you encounter this repertoire, and why did it resonate with you?
I think the first time I encountered with this kind of music was with Zeca Afonso. Is a traditional songwriter, and he did a lot of songs about the revolution and against the revolution. But also in his songs, he also used songs that were from the popular domain. So songs that were not register, so people would sing and would pass through generations. And he has a lot of songs that recorded that represents those songs that has passed through generations. But then Giacometti also recorded a lot of. Is a very important person in Portugal. He's not from Portugal, but recorded a lot of people singing traditional songs in villages everywhere, a little bit everywhere. And nowadays we have also a project that is called Música Portuguesa Gostada Própria. That means Portuguese music liking itself, and it's like the modern version of that recording of people nowadays, and as a project from Tiago. That records goes through every little village in Portugal and records songs that could be lost in like 10, 20 years, and he's recording it. So it's also a good way to find that kind of traditional music.
In a lot of traditional music, and I think especially the one that inspires you, there is a lot of percussions, and in your album as well, but you mostly use electronic beats. And I was wondering if you want to tell me how you worked on those productions.
So my project was born a little bit during the pandemic, and before that I used to play with bands, but because I like to compose and I wanted to continue to create music, I started to use the things I had around me, and I had some traditional percussion instruments and some synthesizers, because I've a little bit before the pandemic I started to research and to learn more about electronic music, concrete music. And so during the pandemic I had a little bit of these elements, and I started producing that. That was something that I didn't know how to do, because I always I composed music, but then I played with a lot of musicians. So for the first time I tried to create something that I could play on my own, and that I could record on my own. So that was a little bit the beginning of the project during those times, and yeah. So the traditional music and the electronic parts of it, and also the use of day-to-day objects in my songs, because in the pandemic I had a lot of a little bit of instruments, but I didn't have like a big quantity. So I started to use the instruments that I had around me. So keys or glasses or something, anything that I could find in my house, I would use it. So I think that was the time I really started to explore everything and everything that could be used as music. And so objects became instruments also.
And what is your connection with Musique Concrete, avant-garde, this kind of music?
So a little bit before the pandemic, I went and I made a workshop with Aka Parmeruts. That is a musician that uses a little bit some principles of the concrete music, and he introduced me to the idea that that you could use recordings to make music. So I was in a workshop. The idea was to compose. We had limited time and we had field recordings, and the idea was to try to compose. Of course, the concrete music, the aim is not completely to create something music as we know, like in the format as we know, but I took a little bit of the idea of the concrete music and I applied in a more musical way, in the way I wanted to make music. So, but before that I haven't even thought about. Because I studied classical music and jazz music, so everything is based on instruments, and so it was very important for me to encounter that exists other types of music that I didn't know it existed. So
I think also for people who are not familiar, like hearing this kind of music can be very interesting, because it's it's apart from its historical relevance, it's also just, I think it kind of represents also the bizarre and uncomfortable things that are just part of
but I think
our world.
But once, of course, I applied those ideas in a very musical sense, like into the traditional and to the electronic part of music, but it was very essential to me to understand that music could be almost anything. So I started to use field recordings as well.
You hear it in the way there are maybe some sounds that are sort of interferences or like some very high pitch, or also like some of the sounds it feels like they're very heavy or very like they have weight, and it feels like there is every texture has a particular sense and meaning in a way. All these elements that we mentioned, you combine them to mostly make pop songs or experimental pop songs. And I was wondering, how is your songwriting process? Do you write on keys and like melody and chords and then add the layers, or how is the process?
I studied jazz and classical music, but I don't think with chords. So the first thing that I put in my music is the melody, and then I start to, for example, it can appear anytime if I'm bored or I cannot sleep. I start to record things, and then in another day I recover those. I listen to those recordings and start to select which are the best parts. And so the first part is the melody, and then I start to build the rhythm and everything. And so I put that melody on top of a rhythm thing that I create, and then I start to add layers and see what happens.
What do your neighbors think about you singing in the nights? Okay, looking forward to the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.